Welcome, everyone. We just lost our president, camera. And I'm Sandy Berg, and I'm the program chair for Wild Ones River City. And we're going to just wait a minute, and here comes Elise again.
Oh my
And
gosh. I hope I can get through this without leaving, without
you're,
my
you're good,
screen leaving. Welcome to our February 2026 Wild Ones River City program. My name is Elise Rowe and of the River City chapter. For those of you who are new to Wild Ones, we are a local chapter of a national organization, a nonprofit that focuses on increasing biodiversity through native plant landscaping. Our presenter talked to us about the importance of these critical ecosystems. Abby Pointer from the Michigan Nature Association will be our speaker. Before we move on to our program, though, I want to put in a good word for being a member of Wild Ones. Most of our events and programs are open and free to everyone, and that is how it should be. We want people to have access to our information about native plants and the wider world of restoring ecosystems. But there are advantages to being a member of Wild Ones. Being a member enables you to support a great organization, and it's also a way to help provide funding for the many free events and opportunities that we offer. As a member, benefits include attending garden walkabouts that are hosted by members for members to tour their native plant gardens. Wild Ones River City members also have an early option to order plants at our annual native plant sale in June. There is a link on our website, rivercitywildones.org, where you can join, which is done through the National Wild Ones. When you put River City as your chapter, that will connect you to us. If you are not in the Grand Rapids area, there are lots of other Michigan Wild Ones chapters as well as chapters in other states. Hopefully you can find one near you. I have one more thing that I would like to promote, and that is to encourage you to sign up for some of our volunteer opportunities. Excuse me. It's a great way to meet other Wild Ones members and to promote our mission. We have lots of outreach opportunities, and you can staff a display booth with another person at a local event. You can talk to people about native plants and give away handouts. Sign-ups for outreach events are through a link to Sign Up Genius on our website under Volunteer. We will also be starting work days at our native plant garden in the early spring. They are one time a month at the garden on Cherry Street in Grand Rapids. Typical garden maintenance is our work at the garden to make it attractive to passers-by. Before we introduce our speaker, there are some housekeeping items that I want to remind you about. There are several buttons at the bottom of your screen. The chat button is where you can type comments during the presentation, and it is also where we will post websites and other links that correlate to the program. If you want to put your location in the chat box, please do so. It's always fun to see where everybody is from. In our past Zoom webinars, we have had folks from West Michigan, but also from around the state, the Midwest, and even around the world. The Q&A button is for you to type in questions that you would like Abby to answer at the end of the presentation. And lastly, you will receive an email in a couple of days with a link to the YouTube recording of this program. You are welcome to pass it on to anyone who you think might enjoy it. And now I will introduce our speaker, Abby Pointer. Abby joined Michigan Nature Association in the summer of 2022 as a Vernal Pools Partnership Coordinator. Her role has now expanded to the Associate Director of Community Engagement and Partnership. She coordinates with the Michigan Vernal Pools Partnership, a collaborative statewide partnership focusing on conservation, research, and mapping. and education around vernal pools. Her expanded role now includes leading MNA's education and outreach initiatives. Abby is passionate about the diversity of relationships humans have with the natural world, which was fostered by her degree in conservation biology at Michigan State University. Her previous experience working with a conservation nonprofit organization in Uganda and AmeriCorps work with the Michigan DNR. Abby lives in Detroit with her partner and enjoys nurturing her garden, yoga, crafting, and spending time outside. And now I will turn it over to Abby.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Elise, for the introduction, and it's very nice to be chatting with presenting, maybe kind of virtually chatting after the presentation this evening. Um, I'm looking at all the where people are from in the chat, and I see someone from Ada. I went to high school in Ada, so hello, and also hello to everyone else. So yes, I work for the Michigan Nature Association. We are a statewide land conservancy that's been around since 1952, and we're especially our mission is to conserve native, rare and endangered species in the state of Michigan, and the habitats that they need to survive. So we do that through, land protection, acquiring land, stewardship, so maintaining those lands that we own, education, outreach, and then collaborating with partners across the state, and hopefully, ideally, doing some research along the way. So, kind of a lot of stuff going on. We've got about 180 sanctuaries across the state, and so all in all, lots going on with the Michigan Nature Association. But part of my role is to coordinate the Michigan Vernal Pools Partnership, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But today I will be giving a presentation about kind of the basic general ecology of vernal pools, why they're important for us to conserve and pay attention to in the state of Michigan, and how you can get involved with vernal pool conservation right in your backyard, possibly, or maybe down the street or in your local park. So I'll get into it. Okay. All right. So usually I say, raise your hand if you've ever seen something like this in the spring, or maybe you would have heard it first. Sometimes I say that you can hear vernal pools before you can see them because of all the peepers and the wood frogs in the early spring. Just as things kind of start to come out and it's those first warm, rainy days. Oh yeah, we know about the vernal pools. Da-da-da. So vernal pools are critical for maintaining forest ecosystem health and biodiversity. Um, we're going to talk about what is a vernal pool and how you can identify them, why they're important, and what we're doing in Michigan. I guess I kind of said that already. Overall, starting at the basics, what is a vernal pool? They are a type of wetland. They are specifically a seasonally flooded wetland that fills in the spring from from early rains and snowmelt. They'll hold water for at least 2 months, and then they'll dry out throughout the summer and into the early fall from evaporation, evapotranspiration, so the plants sucking the water, out of into the roots. Um, and then they'll be dry and maybe a little bit wet through the winter. They are typically found in forested ecosystems. In Michigan, we especially talk about them as part of forested ecosystems. Um, because they dry up and have this seasonal hydro period, it's important to know that they are fishless. Fish are voracious predators. So we'll talk about the species that live in vernal pools, but if you remove that big predator from the food chain, then it makes for a much better habitat for things like salamanders and frogs. And because they're fishless, this makes them habitat for diverse and unique species. Yeah, so here are the indicator species. So indicator species are for vernal pools, help us to identify that is a vernal pool that you've seen. And the word obligate refers to the fact that these four species you're seeing on the screen require vernal pools for either all or part of their life cycle to survive. So you might recognize some of these, you might not recognize them all. There's two salamanders that require vernal pools. They use them as nursery habitat. Well, all of these species use them as nursery habitat. So they, breed in the early spring, they lay their eggs, and they, fully develop into full organisms before the pool dries out. So they have to, do all that business in about 2 months. Sometimes a little longer. It really does depend on the hydro period. And then fairy shrimp are this really cool a crustacean. It's got 13 legs. They swim upside down. The legs are used for swimming, and they also are used for collecting like little microorganisms, and that's how they eat, I'm pretty sure. And I think they have also uh, the things that see I'm a little rusty in my vernal pools because it's February and it's been a whole year. But vernal pools are furry shrimp are very cool. We'll talk a little bit more about them. We can talk a little bit more about them. They lay their eggs in the soil during while this pool is full, and then they live their whole lifespan while the pool is still full of water. The pool dries out, and then those eggs will remain dormant in the soil until the next year when the pool fills, and then that new generation of fairy shrimp hatches. So they're the species that live in vernal pools. They require vernal pools for all of their life cycle, and they're not often found other places. Also a note that says, these you can still have a vernal pool that doesn't have indicator species. It's one of the ways, to confirm that you have a vernal pool, but because of the changes to the landscape over time, it's very possible that, there's a pool that doesn't have these indicator species anymore. Where can we find vernal pools? You can find them statewide. You can find them in different forest types. You can find them in, typically upland forests, but also small depressions within larger wetlands, floodplain pools, sometimes in a wooded dune and swale complex. And they kind of have to have the right conditions. So it's about, the soil type. They have to, there's a lot going on there. There's just a lot going on with vernal pools. They will look different depending on the setting that you find them in. We sometimes classify them through, I'll talk about the Vernal Pool Patrol, which is the monitoring program, the community science program. But the vernal pools are classified based on their vegetation. So here's a couple different examples. You can have an open pool where you don't find much in it at all. You can find a, pool that's the opposite of that, and it's full of trees. We call that a forested pool. Some can be dominated by shrubs. Some have a lot more herbaceous vegetation. One size does not fit all. And here, because this is the wild ones, I threw on some plants that you might find in a vernal pool. Um, you know, Unlike the species, there's not really any indicator plants that'll tell you that this is a vernal pool. You'll mostly find plants that are, adapted in some way to living in wet environments. You'll have those hydric soils. Sometimes, you'll want a plant that is able to live in flooded, a flooded a flooded habitat for a certain amount of time. So trees that looks like, sycamores, swamp white oaks, silver maples, red maples, cottonwood. I have seen an American elm, but I know that there's much less of those now than there used to be. Speckled alder, buttonbush is one of my favorite. Um, the red osier dogwood, jewelweed, and these plants that are able to live in wet environments have adaptations that allow them to do this. For instance, with the trees, you might find them having these shallow spreading roots that allow them to get more oxygen. The roots might kind of like sit on top of the earth a little bit. so that they, don't drown. And some of like the red osier dogwood have big lenticels, which is their openings for gas exchange. So they're adapted to living in these wet environments. But there's not a particular plant that is an indicator of a vernal pool. Another way that vernal pools vary is through their hydro period. Most often, we talk about these spring filling pools that, like I said, fill up in the early spring and dry out throughout the summer. But you can also have pools that don't dry out for 2 to 3 years, depending on the size, if they're quite large. Some pools fill in the fall a little bit, and this is really great for marbled salamanders, if you've ever heard of that type of salamander. They actually lay their eggs in the fall in these vernal pools. And yeah, dry completely every 5 to 10 years. Some pools, you have to keep going back to see to make sure that it's a pool. But overall, mostly they are small and shallow. They're less than 2.5 acres. Most of them are about a quarter acre, and they're about a meter deep, if that. You usually can't get up to your waist in them. They're isolated from other permanent water bodies. This is really important, um, because this is what keeps them fishless. If they were connected to a river or a lake in a permanent way, um, that would kind of that's one of the differentiations. However, they can be temporarily, this is another tricky thing, they can be temporarily connected to, let's say like a flood, if you have in a floodplain forest, or if you have like an intermittent stream that connects a complex of pools or to a larger, more permanent swamp. But also they are connected to the surrounding forest and watershed. Just, ecologically. We call them isolated or discrete, but they are, really anything but isolated. This slide is to emphasize the importance that they play in that connection to the surrounding watershed and forest, by mentioning salamander migration. So like I mentioned, pools fill up in the early spring, and they're some of the first, opportunities for breeding and feeding and water. And salamanders on those first early spring nights will actually migrate to their vernal pools, and have a pool party, you might say. Um, they usually migrate back to the same pool from which they were born. They don't go very far, a couple 100 feet. Wood frogs, the other obligate species, can come from much farther, but they exhibit the same kind of behavior. Well, they'll usually go back to the same pond that they came from, the same pool they came from. Um, so as far as they're connected to the forest, vernal pools are sensitive to the changes in their surrounding environment. So that means with things like development and, timber harvesting, that kind of thing can affect the species that live in the pool as well as the pool itself. Um, a reduction in canopy cover can change the hydrology. If you reduce the, amount of shade that a pool gets, it might dry up a little faster because, it's got more exposure to the sun. So I feel like you're probably getting why vernal pools are important. Um, but we'll just let these little creatures come up on the screen. So you see you've got your vernal pool indicator species, your spotted salamanders and your blue spotted salamanders, lots of macroinvertebrates. Here's another fairy shrimp, wood frogs at their pool party. Daphnia, caddis flies are super cool. I'm pretty sure this is a predaceous diving beetle larvae. Mosquitoes, you definitely will find mosquitoes. Dragonflies and damselflies. Lots of little water midges. I think that might be a chironomid midge. Again, a little bit out of season. So looking at all those species, again, vernal pools are essential for maintaining healthy and resilient forested ecosystems. They're nature's nurseries. They're the coral reefs of the northern forests, and they provide all these great ecosystem services that other wetlands also, contribute as well. Um, mhm. I'll talk a little bit about each of those things that makes them important. Nature's nurseries, again, we've talked about how they're these first breeding opportunities for um, forest dwelling amphibians that come from the surrounding uplands. Here, they're egg masses that look like these, gelatinous, gelatinous masses, you might say. And you can tell what the different species are based off the different characteristics that you see here. So the blue spotted salamander egg mass is really droopy. The wood frogs lay many, many, many eggs, like hundreds of eggs at a time. Um, and they look different from the spotted salamanders because there's not that like outer casing around like the whole mass. They're not as droopy. You can kind of tell the difference there between the two salamanders. We don't have a picture of the fairy shrimp eggs. Those are called cysts because they're very, very small. Do not have a picture of those. But in addition to the indicator species, a lot of macroinvertebrates also use vernal pools as nursery habitat, as you could tell from this past slide. The dams, the predaceous diving beetle larvae, like that's just the larval stage. A lot of these critters will, grow in vernal pools and then move to the surrounding forest, just like the amphibians do. So they're just as important as far as, contributions to forest biomass. Um, they are coral reefs of the northern temperate forest. There's been over 550 species documented using vernal pools. They're kind of like, a good phrase to describe how creatures use them in the forest is as stepping stones in an upland landscape. So they're kind of like little fast food restaurants. Um, I've also heard them called. Um, and then here's the ecosystem services part. Um, Nutrient cycling is something we've been talking a lot about recently as far as the contribution that vernal pools play to the surrounding forest. Um, they regulate populations of soil invertebrates responsible for the breakdown of organic material. So the base of a food chain in a vernal pool is actually that leaf litter detritus base. So that breaking down of debris that you'd find, the vernal pool will collect. I mean, it collects leaves and sticks and stuff, and that's the base of the food chain that all those macroinvertebrates use. I mean, they shred them up. I'm trying to think of the different, you know, I'm getting too deep into it. I'm going to keep going. Well, I can answer questions. But like other wetlands, vernal pools are great for, water quality, recharging the groundwater table. They're really close to that, and flood control. Mhm. And they are also a gateway to forests and wetlands. So they're a great opportunity to connect young people in local communities. Um, to nature. They're really accessible. They are, you take one scoop and you see all these things like swimming around in just a bucket. There's fairy shrimp. That in itself is quite magical. And so it just kind of provides this entry point for people to kind of explore and learn about ecology. Oh, here we go. So I put these in here because I think this is from one of my monitoring visits last year where we saw almost all of the indicator species at this particular pool. Just no spotted salamanders. So it's just really nice to get out in the early spring and just spend some time outside. Why should we care? So, generally, a lot of people don't know what vernal pools are, which is entirely fair. Like I said, sometimes you can, hear them before you see them. So people might generally, have a sense that they, might know there's something like that out there, but not know the impact that they have on the landscape. We have limited information about them, because they're hard to identify and map. Um, so the way that we typically map our wetlands, if you go to Eagle's website, you can see the Michigan Wetland Mapper, and you can kind of explore the different wetlands that are mapped. But vernal pools oftentimes aren't included because the way that we make those maps historically has been through aerial imagery. So planes that take pictures, and then someone will look at a picture and try and, they'll circle the wetlands, and then someone will go out and look. But because vernal pools are in forested areas, um, they're really hard to map that way. They're oftentimes missed. Especially also if the pictures are taken in a season where you have you know, it's a leaf off, right? But the pools are dry. You might miss them that way. Coniferous forests, they never lose their leaves, so you just really totally miss the pools that are found in coniferous forests. Um, and so we just really don't have a great understanding of where they are on the landscape now and historically, which makes it hard to track, what the populations of critters look like. They also have limited protection. They're not protected at all on a national level through our national wetland protections. In Michigan, there's some protection, but it's limited. They have to be greater than 5 acres in size, generally. And then there's some special applications where, if they're within a certain distance from a Great Lakes, one of the Great Lakes, or if they're connected to or within a certain distance of, a larger inland lake, pond, river, stream, or if you're able to find, a rare listed threatened and endangered species. There's ways to protect vernal pools, but generally, they get missed because they're hard to find and people don't know what they are. Why should we care? Well, they're very vulnerable for all these reasons to loss and degradation. Development, like anything else, threatens vernal pools. Oftentimes people will be, confused that this pond dries out in their forest and convert them to permanent ponds. Like I mentioned earlier, they're susceptible to timber harvesting. Changes in the canopy affects the pool, and that affects the species. Pollution, invasive species, climate change, all the things that, uh, affect our planet also affect vernal pools and are especially vulnerable because of these things. But we also know that there's a lot that we can do, and there's a lot going on, really. So despite the sadness, it's actually quite fun to be involved. On the ground, stewardship and conservation is critical to protecting vernal pools. And now I'm going to kind of start the part of the presentation where we get into how you can be involved and what people in the rest of the state are doing to better conserve and map and monitor vernal pools. Mhm. And this is a slide to acknowledge that this is not just a problem, or this is not just something that's happening in Michigan. Um, Lots of states across the northern temperate forested region, so like, from Minnesota up to Maine, acknowledge the importance of vernal pools and are working to, better protect them in whatever way that comes, right? So in Michigan, this slide is kind of an overview of the program we have going on here. So I coordinate the Michigan Vernal Pools Partnership, and there's also the Vernal Pool Patrol, oftentimes confused. which is fair because they work together. They kind of were, you know, I wouldn't say formed at the same time, but they have a reciprocal relationship, information exchange. So the Vernal Pools Partnership is a private-public partnership that consists of, about 50 partners across the state, working to conserve, research, and increase the education and outreach of vernal pools. We operate through, a series of subcommittees who contribute their time and resources towards objectives in our strategic plan. These logos here are the people that represent our steering committee. Um, the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, which you see over here with the Vernal Pool Patrol, um, Eagle, and the Michigan Nature Association were co-founders of the partnership in 2015. We also work really closely with, Michigan Tech to do the mapping, which I think I have a slide on later. But the work that they're doing to map vernal pools with LiDAR is its whole thing that I can't get into today because it's you know LiDAR and mapping with satellites. It's really cool. And then the Vernal Pool Patrol, the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, coordinates this. It is a community science program that trains community members to identify vernal pools near them and collect some basic information, monitor them for a couple seasons, and that information is stored in our Michigan Vernal Pools database, which is accessible to members of the Vernal Pool Patrol. And you know, if you're looking for data, we have it if you're hoping to answer a question about vernal pools, research and mapping related. And we have about 22 local program coordinators for this program. And I'll get into a little bit of what that means later. But more or less, these groups work hand in hand. There's a lot of overlap in who's involved in what. Or we're all working towards the same goals, just in different ways. This is a slide just acknowledging, well, there we go, River. I know sometimes usually, oh, one will pop up at the end. But these are our partners, our current partners across the state of Michigan. And this represents the distribution of partners. Lots of conservation nonprofits, land conservancies, nature centers. Those are all kind of, hard to distinguish between those things sometimes. Watershed groups. We've got some involvement from the governance level, researchers from the Michigan Tech Research Institute, one of them, universities and education. This is the LiDAR. So this is where we're going to start with the vernal pool mapping. So I mentioned earlier that most vernal pools are mapped using aerial imagery, which is not a very effective or efficient way to map vernal pools. So instead, the Michigan Tech Research Institute over like the past 10 years has developed this methodology using satellite imagery to identify pools in this multi-step process. So they will, look at LiDAR, and I see again, I'm not going to be able to articulate this super great at the top at this moment, and I apologize. But yes, they identify pools through these wonderful steps that we have a whole talk on from our past annual meeting. But the important thing to know from this slide is that while we still can, this is a really great way to identify potential pools in a much more efficient way than we have been able to do. But we really do rely on the field verification to make sure that what we're seeing from, a satellite is for sure what's on the ground. And that's the field verification part, the community science part. And that's where the Vernal Pool Patrol comes in. This is UMan and Courtney. If you're involved in the Pool Patrol, you'd be familiar with them. They coordinate the statewide program. And each spring, actually started last week, they put on a free virtual training series where they, like I said, teach you to identify, map, and monitor pools. There's 3 sessions. They are from 6 to 8:30 in Tuesday evenings. They are full of information. So if you have any, deeper questions about vernal pools, if you want to know all about the species that live there, and how they're adapted to live in vernal pools, and all about the monitoring protocol, they do a really great job. All of these trainings are recorded, so even though that they started last week, um, there's still, plenty of opportunity to get involved. It's still early in the season. If you are planning on getting out to a pool, and actually collecting some data, they recommend that you attend a field training. These happen across the state with our program coordinators. That's where those folks come in. And program coordinators are essentially organizations that facilitate the pool patrol at a more local level. So in Kent County, Corey Redman is your program coordinator at the Grand Rapids Public Museum. And I just put this in here. This is an upcoming training in late March. I don't think the location has been announced, but last year it was near the Rogue River. I'm pretty sure. Um, So at a field training, what you'll learn to do, it's set up in stations. And so you'll rotate through stations to learn about the monitoring form. So the basic information that you'll collect. You'll learn to look at the surrounding habitat and explore the botany that might help you indicate that you're like, looking at a wet spot, you're looking at a potential wetland. And then you'll have a session where we'll have um, one of the rotations is looking at the species. And then you'll also learn how to use the app, which you submit data through. But you can work with your program coordinator and use a paper form. So it's not necessary. This is some examples of data that you'll collect through the pool patrol. Um, like I mentioned at the top, you will look at vernal pool type. That's related to the habitat and the plant section in the training. You'll look for, indicator species. You'll collect some basic information on, the depth of the pool, the width, the size. Oh, hello. How did you get in here? Sorry. And then you'll look at the surrounding landscape and evaluate for disturbances and threats. So if there's invasive species, if there's a road nearby where, salt might be draining into the pool, that stuff is important to note. And we want to know we would like to know. And this is the database. So you can see, so we recently updated it where we had all of the individual pools mapped, but there's been some concerns about, what about, on private lands? Folks don't want those identifications out there. Folks don't want those locations out there. And then poaching of species. So it's not really been a problem, but forward thinking. We don't want people going out to sensitive locations where they might find, salamanders and maybe some other rare species, rare turtles. So we're just kind of thinking ahead there. So this is what the map looks like. So when you submit data, all of these represent where pools have been mapped, and the darker green they are, the more pools there are mapped in that location. So Grand Rapids is doing pretty good, but definitely more to do. Here's the program coordinators. If you're not from the Grand Rapids area, like I mentioned, Corey Redman is at I'm sorry. Is at the Grand Rapids Public Museum. In Ottawa County, we've got Avril Weirs at the Career Line Tech Center. And in Allegan, Nathan Hillbrands is with the Allegan Conservation District. So zooming out a little bit, like I mentioned earlier, vernal pool conservation is not just, an issue that we're talking about in Michigan. It's a conversation that's region wide. For the past couple years, we actually have been working with, we got a grant from NASA, which feels almost fake to say, but we've been working with the states on this map here, to come up with a common definition of vernal pools, criteria for high quality pools, and common data standards. So the stuff that you would collect in a monitoring protocol, in a monitoring visit, for across the region, so that we can have a region-wide database, and we all can collect information that's the same. And that way, it's easier to evaluate and ask questions about and use, and share. So this is really exciting. We're mapping currently vernal pools using the methodology developed by Michigan Tech, the satellite imagery paired with the field verification by community scientists in Michigan, Wisconsin, and New York. But we're also working with all of these states over here. They're participating. We're meeting quite often to talk about the definition of pools, and how we want to, how we want to conserve them across the region. And ideally, with with this information, we can answer questions like, which vernal pools are more vulnerable to climate change and land use, and which are highest quality, based on the biological diversity and physical factors, and if we'd be able to predict that kind of thing using satellite imagery. And, I, she don't come here, and all that good stuff. So, starting to wrap up, we would love for you to stay connected. If you are interested in participating, or just kind of staying up to date with what's going on in the state, we have a quarterly newsletter called the Pool Report. I can put that link in the chat in just a minute. But that's a great spot for finding out about upcoming events near you, trainings, outreach materials that might be available. And we are also on social media. Doo-doo-doo. And we have websites where all of this information lives. A lot of great resources here. Another thing, one more I want to mention. In December, we have a annual meeting where community scientists and partners and anyone involved in vernal pool conservation in the state, we, get together and discuss the year, highlights, and then we'll bring in folks who are, currently doing research, or, have exciting projects in the world of vernal pool conservation. So there's a lot going on, and honestly, there's other things lots to talk about. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate everyone for joining and listening, and maybe we'll see you out in a vernal pool this spring. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby. That was so interesting. We really appreciate you presenting to us tonight.
Yeah. Sorry about I can't get her to go away.
Oh no, we love seeing everybody's pets. We do have a few questions. Let me just see. I guess I had one too. If one wanted to register for
Mhm.
the Vernal Pool Patrol, would one go to that Michigan Vernal Pool website that you had listed there, or how would they go about doing that?
Yes, that is a good question. I'm just checking right now to see if the link to register is still open. I'm pretty sure I thought it was as of, oh yeah, there it is. Okay, so I'll put this in the chat.
Great.
Um, but yes, and so the recording that from last Tuesday is already up, and you can watch that whenever you'd like. Here we go. So that's the website that you'd go to register. Oh, that's my shared screen. I'll stop sharing now. Um, and I'll put in the link for the newsletter as well.
Great.
Um, Usually I have that ready. Dun.
Okay, super.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so some other questions that we had tonight. Barbara wanted to know, um, if an isolated pool of water in the woods doesn't dry up during the year, would it not be a vernal pool?
Well, it just depends. Uh, Not every pool dries up every year. So you'd have to go and look and check over, maybe a couple years you'd want to keep looking. You'd want to look and see if there's fish in it. That's a really great way to tell if that's a vernal pool. And then also looking for those indicator species.
Okay.
It's not it's not a given, but it's a great yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Marty wants to know, is it possible to create a vernal pool if you have a wooded area on your property?
Yeah, I mean, I have participated in a vernal pool creation activity. The Ohio, there's an organization in Ohio called they put on a conference called Vernal Palooza, and they make a vernal pool every year. So yes, you can, and we have some resources on that. But they might, depending on the area, they might not serve the same ecological purpose that, a natural vernal pool might. Salamanders and frogs and those species that, really rely on vernal pools for breeding, don't travel very far. So they, don't really inhabit new pools very often unless, there's already a population existing in that area. Um, so I hope that answers your question. But we
Um,
don't do a whole lot of creation in Michigan. Sorry.
so Melody wanted to know, going back to your slide that had
Mhm.
the satellite imagery and then led to the field verification, what
Hmm.
the gray mapping for Kalamazoo County indicates.
Mm. So let me see if I can. Let me see the question. So, what does the gray mapping for Vernal Pool County for Kalamazoo County indicate? Okay, so in this slide here, maybe. Um,
I wasn't sure if it was that slide or if it was the slide that actually showed
oh,
the LiDAR imagery.
yeah. So I don't know specifically about what the LiDAR
I,
looks like in Kalamazoo. Um, I think that, there's definitely LiDAR information for that county. But as far as our database goes, this light gray square means there's probably a handful of pools mapped, but not that many. This is a still image, but the actual database has like a key, and you can kind of, click around and explore a little bit more. If you want to visit. That's on the same website as the link that I put in the chat. The first one with the where you'd go to register. There's a on the navigation bar. There's something that says Vernal Pool Database. Here, I'll pull that up. But yeah, so it's right here. Um,
Right.
mhm. Yeah, sorry.
And someone else wanted to know who the coordinator is for Kalamazoo County.
Mm, good question. Let's go over here. Da-da-da. Jessica Hagan. Um, I think this might not be up to date, but I'm pretty sure she's still the coordinator. I think now she's with the Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy. That email should still work. But yeah, she's great.
Okay, great, thank you. And Eric wanted to know if there are groups involved with vernal pools in provinces in Canada, such as Ontario, Quebec, New
Mm.
Brunswick.
There definitely is. We have been trying to meet folks in Canada. It's just a little bit more challenging. I'm not super familiar. I know that there is, but I don't know exactly who they are. But they have the same kind of forest that we do, especially in that Ontario area. So they definitely have pools that are very similar to what we have here and across the rest of the, northern Great Lakes area.
Okay, great. Uh, Eric also wanted to know if a vernal pool gets destroyed by urbanization or home building, is it possible to restore it at a later
Mm-hmm.
time?
Well, I mean, I feel like probably no. Um, they're pretty delicate, and I didn't get too much into it, but that like detritus layer, that layer of like decaying organic material that builds up over time, that would be something that would be hard to restore. And that's something to be said too with like the creation of vernal pools. It does definitely depend on the soil and the surrounding habitat as far as like the ecological function. If it doesn't have that, it'll take a while to accumulate that layer of, you know, that layer of detritus. So I mean, I guess that's a tricky one. I guess it just depends on the area, probably, in the specific conditions.
Okay. And one last question from Jerry is what's the difference between a vernal pool and a drainage ditch?
Hmm.
Can a drainage ditch act as a vernal pool?
They can. Um, well, so so like salamanders and frogs will, kind of lay their eggs wherever. I mean, they typically, like I said, will migrate to their natal pond. But they're not the smartest. And we definitely do find, egg masses in like ruts, like tire ruts. So like drainage ditches is like, if there's critters in that area, there's salamanders or frogs in that area, they could definitely possibly use that as a vernal pool. But they probably won't have the same survival rate if they don't like, if it dries out too fast or, if there's other predators in that area, the fishlessness of vernal pools. So there's that. But in India, so one of the partners we work with in Southern Illinois, um, they mostly work with naturalized vernal pools so that, because of the history of that landscape, there's not a lot of natural pools left. And so the critters in that area will use like old CCC ponds that were dug in like the 30s or 40s or, yeah, in the 30s, I think. Um, yeah, and so they're, salamanders and frogs and those kind of critters don't really know the difference. But it's just the survival rate is probably less.
And somebody just asked another question. Jan wants to know if rain gardens that are being put in at various building sites, could they become vernal pools or are they
Mm.
being put in for a different purpose?
Those are put in, I think, typically for a different purpose. Those rain gardens, or like sometimes they're called bioswales, are used to kind of like attenuate the flow of surface water is a phrase that I've heard used, which is kind of fun to say. But basically just collect rainwater from, collecting on our impervious surfaces. So if there's, again, it's one of those things, like if there's critters in the area, they might use it, but oftentimes they're for something else.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's all the questions Thank you so much, Abby. Once again, we've appreciated you being here tonight with us. And to the audience, again, I want to assure you that this presentation has been recorded. And in a couple of days, since you registered, you should get a link to that recording. And you're welcome to share it with anyone you think might be interested. And also, I would encourage you all to join us again March 16th at 6:30 when we will have another webinar on Zoom called Wet, Wild, and Rare: Understanding Michigan's Fens and Bogs. And Benjamin Botwinski from the Lansing Public Schools Ebersol Center in Wayland, Michigan, is going to be our presenter in March. So you should find a registration button soon on our website. Well, thank you all for attending, and hope to see you again at a Wild Ones event, third Monday of the month. So good night, everyone.